This is Kari Kampakis, and you're listening to the Girl Mom Podcast. Today on the show, I've brought back my dear friend Kim Anderson, a Nashville counselor who specializes in helping moms get unstuck so that they can get healthy for themselves as well as their families. Kim and I had the best time leading the Moms with Impact Retreat last October. And one session that was a big hit with our guest was learning about the Meyers-Briggs Personality Test. Understanding our personality as moms, as well as the personality of our children, is incredibly helpful. And several moms told us that they immediately saw a difference in their relationship with their child as they used the insight that they gained to respond in new ways to what would normally have been a stressful or triggering situation with their child. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a comment or a 5-star review wherever you listen and share it with friends. Also, my new devotional for teen and college girls is releasing January 21st, so make sure and get your copy through the show notes if you haven't ordered it already. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy the show. Welcome back, Kim. I'm so thrilled to have you back here in Birmingham and recording with me. I told you right before we started, I feel a little rusty, but I know we will get back into the groove soon enough.
We all feel that way after the holidays. January is just kind of a rusty season for us all.
I know it is. I feel like I'm just hibernating. It's so hard for me just to get out and get back in the roll of things right now.
I agree.
Well, I'm excited. This was, as I mentioned in the intro, This it surprised me, and you told me before we had the retreat that moms love the Myers-Briggs, that's always something so popular when you do your sessions. And you were right. Like, I felt like that was one session that a lot of people were really talking about and wanting more information on. So tell me a little bit about how it came about, how you started doing it as a counselor, the benefit that you've seen for moms using it to understand themselves and their children better.
Yeah, well, the Myers-Briggs has been around forever. It was actually developed, years ago by Isabel Myers and Catherine Briggs, their mother and daughter, and it's based on Carl Jung's theory. And they took it and they just tried to give us a framework to understand ourselves and others better. And so really, it's a map. It's a map to understanding how we're created, how our family members are created, how our friends are created. And I have found, just as a therapist, I love using assessments with my clients. The Myers-Briggs is one of them. I use a lot of different ones as well, just to get a lens, because when we have a framework, when we have language for how somebody else prefers to live their lives, then it gives us compassion, it gives us patience, it gives us insight, and I feel like it just dissipates tension, right, that we could have with other people. And so what the Myers-Briggs assesses is our preferences, how we like to live in the world. And so it's not measuring our potential or, predicting success, so to speak. It's really just saying, how do you prefer to live life? And so one of the things I like to do when I'm working with others or leading a workshop around this is I have people pick up a pen or a pencil and write with their non-dominant hand.
Okay.
Right? And so I'm right-handed, and if I pick up a pen and I try and write my name with my non-dominant hand, it's going to feel awkward, right? We're going to feel clumsy. It's going to look messy. And so that's really what the Myers-Briggs does, is it just measures how do we prefer. Like, I prefer to write with my left hand. Could I write with my left? I prefer to write with my right hand.
Right.
Could I write with my left hand? I could, but it's not ideal.
And I think it's so important to understand that. And that's something you really realize when you've been parenting as long as you and I have, is that everybody's so different, and coming at it from a spiritual lens, like God created us differently. And, we're not supposed to be different just for the sake of being different. I'm not saying just so we can go dye our hair pink or whatever, just to be strange and different. But He created us uniquely. And there's a C.S. Lewis quote that I've always loved, and I can't remember the exact phrase, but it's something like, how monotonously alike are all the tyrants of the world, and how gloriously different are all the saints. And that's one reason in the Catholic Church that we talk a lot about the saints, and you study the lives of the saints, because it just shows that there's so many different paths to God, and there's so many ways to be holy. And there are some saints that are extroverts, and there are some saints that are introverts. There are some saints that spent their whole life worshiping God, and there were some saints that were hellions for years, and then they came to God later in life through some come to Jesus crisis. And so I think that's so refreshing and necessary for parents to hear, that if your child is different than you, then it's really, rather than trying to put them into a box, if you're an introvert and they're an extrovert, trying to make them like you, to really see your child as this little mystery box that our job is to unlock that treasure inside and to help them, to set them up to thrive in whatever their strengths are.
And to really, let them be who God created them to be, not who we think that they should be, because that's how we want it to be. And, if you have more than one child, you see how differently they're wired, even though they come from the same genes and they grow up in the same household, right? They have a unique a unique fingerprint in the world. And so with the Meyers-Briggs, it can sometimes be confusing to people because there's 4 different letters that represent your type. Okay. So there's 16 different possibilities. Okay. But really what we do is we break it down to 4 different spectrums. Okay. And so it's really easy when we look at those 4 spectrums. There's you're either an introvert or you're an extrovert, right? You're either a sensor or an intuitive. You're either a thinker or feeler or judger or perceiver. And so, starting, if we want to start with the first spectrum, which is the extrovert, introvert, I think that's pretty common. Most people have heard these terms. They know innately if they're an extrovert and an introvert or an introvert, but there's a lot of misconception, I think, around both of these types. And
yes, definitely. And I think that there's a lot of people that are probably like me that are introverts but make themselves extroverts. You learn as you get older. But anyway, I remember my dad saying that. Like, if you met my dad, and people listening, if you follow me on social media, you may have seen my dad in a dancing video. Like, he is the fun papa at 89 years old, still dancing. He may have his cane, but he's so fun. He's so alive. He has the best and funniest personality. But I remember one time when I was younger, he told me he was an introvert. And I'm like, Dad, you are not an introvert. And he's like, yes, I'm an introvert who makes myself an extrovert. Yeah. And that always stuck with me because I was like, wow, that's kind of like how I am. And even like my kids years ago when I would say I was an introvert and they see me, I talk to strangers, like they're like, Mom, you are not an introvert. I'm like, yes, I am. Like I need that time to recharge. I can't do it. I can't be around people all the time. So let's talk about introversion and extroversion and the difference.
Well, and that's really what it comes down to with extroversion versus introversion. It's how do we recharge? So you can be a very social introvert, and at the end of the day, at the end of the workday, at the end of the party that you've just been at, the question is, do you need alone time, or are you ready for the next event? Are you ready for the after party to the party? And so extroverts recharge from being around people. Right? They are energized by people. They enjoy a variety of tasks. They like a quick pace. They're really good at multitasking. And it's that external interaction and activity that really drives them. And so when we look at introverts, right? Introverts recharge from being alone and being in smaller groups. They want more of a deliberate pace. They like to focus on one task at a time. And so at our retreat, we put the extroverts together and the introverts together on opposite side of the rooms, and we gave them a task of building a tower of cards with new card decks. And it was so fun to see, right, what happened. All the extroverts got together, and they're talking, and they all have ideas how to do it, and they're all sharing their ideas, and they're processing verbally, and not getting the task done.
And you predicted this. You predicted this.
Because it's how it always happens.
I remember you telling me when we were talking about this exercise, you predicted that it's typically the introverts that get it done faster.
Yes. And so then on the introverted side, they reflected, they were quiet, they focused, they were measured about how they wanted to build this deck of cards in the time allotted. And what introverts do is they process their thoughts internally before sharing, whereas extroverts process verbally and out loud as they're thinking of them.
Interesting. Okay.
And so the introverts, what was so funny is there were even some introverts that took cards and worked on their own.
That's funny.
and built their own card decks, right? And so one's not right, one's not wrong. It's just how do we prefer to be in the world and gain our strength, our composure, so that we can go back out into the world.
Yeah, and I think, like, you said the key is, like you said, how do you recharge? Like you have said that if you're an extrovert, then if you have an extended period alone, you may feel drained after that period.
Yep.
Why is that? Because
people give us energy, and so
really,
as an extrovert, I remember when my kids were young, and my husband was deployed for quite a while, and I was at home and working at home. I wasn't out around people all the time. And I just remember thinking, I'm just going to go talk to the mailman and see how his day's going.
Right.
I just need to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
And I got so depleted by just, being in that quiet space all day long. Whereas introverts thrive in that space. It's where they come alive. It's where they can think and they come up with their ideas.
Yes.
And having to have small talk too long is extremely draining for introverts.
Yes.
But we live in an extroverted world. And so roughly 75% of the population are extroverts.
Really?
And so
that's fascinating.
Yes, so introverts are set up to fail the way that our world is aligned and organized.
Yeah. Have you ever read that book, Quiet, by Susan Cain?
You told me about it,
Yeah.
and I've heard about it multiple times. Yeah, I would love to. I have not yet.
It's so good, and I follow her on Substack, and it's a great book. And it said, I think she said, it's been years since I read it, but I want to say that she talked about we used to, as a culture, value character. Like that's what was highly valued, and now we value charisma. And so it is a hard world if you're quiet or introvert, it's a hard world to live in. But if you are an introvert or you have a child who's an introvert, you're trying to unlock that. Like that is a great book to read to just give you hope. And that book, obviously, and her whole platform is huge. That it just shows you how many people are introverts and how necessary this message is. That, like I said, we're all designed differently and uniquely and for a purpose. But yeah, talking about the need to recharge, and I'm like that. Like when I go to an event, I love it. I mean, I meet the best people, and it's crazy. I'm like, sometimes I usually, am somewhere for maybe 24 hours, but it is like the most meaningful 24 hours. And I joke that the people that host me and some of the moms that I meet at these events, I mean, I can feel closer to them in 24 hours than I feel to somebody that I've known for 5 years that I've had small talk with, So I love that. But because when I'm talking to a lot of people and I'm speaking, it takes a lot out of me. And so I've learned I've had to leave room in my calendar. Like I don't do anything on that day after the day I get back home, and I kind of leave some space there because I need to recharge. And so when I get home, that's when I'm so glad to be home by myself. And usually the kids are at school, and I'm kind of reflecting at my computer, and I just need like a quiet house because I can't go from one thing to another. And I think that's how do we translate that for ourselves or our children? If your child is introverted, that they might need that space to do that.
Well, the funny thing is, I teach this for a living, and I had labeled our daughter Kyla as an extrovert. An extrovert.
Yeah, I would consider Kyla an extrovert.
Right, she
She's
shows
not,
up like an extrovert.
She does.
And so I, as an extrovert, right, I would bring her to all the things. I would, we'd go to all the play dates. Because that filled my cup. And when she got to college, it hit her, wait a minute, I'm an introvert. I need a lot more time to recharge.
That's funny.
And so I got it wrong even as a parent. But, I think it makes me think of a story. I was speaking one time to a group of moms, and one of the moms shared that she went to pick her son up from a Lego robotics class after school. And when she walked in, she saw him sitting by himself at a table, and all the other kids were together at another table. And as an extrovert, she started panicking. She's like, I felt my heart start racing a little bit. And I thought, oh no, nobody likes him. And then he got in the car, and I started, of course, pinging him with all the questions, because that's what we do as parents, right? We need to figure it out.
We've
got to figure out how do we social engineer this. And she was asking him, kind of, why are you sitting alone? And he said, Mom, I wanted to sit alone. I really wanted to be able to focus on my project, focus on what I was doing. Everybody was talking too loudly. And so I just went over to get some space. Well, he's an introvert and he needed that, And so as moms, as parents, it's so important that we're attuned to what our kids need when it comes to their personalities.
Yes, yeah. And I know some people listening to this probably have the opposite too. And like Harry and I are both more introverts who make ourselves extroverted, but we've got one child especially, and she is such an extrovert. And we just laugh. We're like, where did she come from? But and she's the type that like could go from one thing to another, like would make all these plans. And so we're like, no, let's rein it in. And so she can do it. She can go. But it's interesting parenting that when that's not your personality, but understanding again, God made them that way for a purpose. But, sometimes we're like, we can't do, 3 parties in a row or whatever, it's just interesting. And how in the same family, then we have other children. We have another child that she, our dancer, and it's funny. You see her dancing and she's like full force. Just like full personality, facials, all that. But she comes home and she'll go straight to her room. I've learned to give her that space. And so she needs to recharge and just needs that time alone. And so it's just interesting, it's important as parents to know that, because she's the one I used to pressure with questions. And, I've realized I can't talk to her when she's tired or she needs to recharge or she's hungry. Like, I just got to give her that space.
And not take it personally.
Yes,
right? I see a lot of parents who take it personally.
Right.
If they're extroverts and their introverted child does not want to talk. Think about it. They're at school all day long. They're around people all day long. They're answering teachers' questions all day long. There's drama around them all day long.
Right.
And then they come home and they just need a moment. And if we take that personally, like it's rejection, that they don't want to be with us or talk to us, that could be hard too. I grew up in a family where I was the only extrovert, and so my parents are introverts and my sister's an introvert. And I remember, feeling
like trying to push them to go out.
Like, can I go to so and so's house? I can go activity to activity to activity, even now, right? I have to be careful because I overschedule myself. But I remember saying to my mom, hey, can you take me to Debbie's house? I think I was probably 5 or 6. And she said, Kim, I'm tired. I don't want to take you to Debbie's house. And I just remember thinking, well, what does being tired have to do with anything? That's not, doesn't really matter if you're tired or not.
Right. You just push through it.
You just push, right? And so, if we're an introverted parent, it's understanding that your child does need those connections and does need that energy to be the best version of themselves. And the opposite, if you're an extrovert, giving that introverted child space to regroup and to recharge.
Yeah. And, another story it reminded me of, and I wish I could remember what book this was in, but I want to say it might have been a Max Lucado book, but I read it. I started reading Christian books because of my extroverted child. Like, she was always going, and I'm like, oh, Lord, help me. And I'm like, I need some help. And so I had a friend at the gym. I'm like, you have so much peace and calm. I need that. Give me something. And she's like, I got a book for you. And I thought it was going to be a parenting book. And instead she brought like The Power of a Praying Mom the next morning. So anyway, that book led me to read other books. And there was one, I remember it just jumped out because it was like this child that I was like, she is driving me nuts. She's like all the time, go. And it talked about how there was this mom and this mom had this little boy and he was always going and just so exhausting, and she couldn't wait for him to go to school because he wore her out. And, had, all these stories about, just him growing up. Anyway, he gets to adulthood. It turns out that little boy is Billy Graham.
Oh, wow.
And so the whole point of the story is God created him that way because he would need that energy to go minister all over the world. And I thought that is such a great example of how, like, God wired our children uniquely. And I have another mom friend that she talks about her husband. They've got 4 kids. She was one of my girls' teachers, and she's just the most adorable girl ever. And she and her husband both went to Sanford, and I knew both of them because he was involved in something at MBE. So we knew him, and then we knew her, and they started dating. But she was telling me he kind of pursued her in college, and she was like, he's too much, because he was just like had so much energy, and she wasn't interested in dating for years, and then one day they just basically her heart opened up and God opened her eyes and they started dating, and Now they're the cutest family. But she's like, now what drove me crazy, his energy is what makes him such a great father and husband. Like, he can work all day long and he comes home and still has so much energy for me and our 4 kids.
What a gift.
Isn't that a gift? Yeah. And I'm like, these moms of hyperactive little boys or girls, like, that's so, to think bigger than what you're seeing right now, that, you know, their personality is playing into God's plan for them and it's his journey that he has set for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when your kids are younger, you know, if you've got kids that are, I don't know, 12, 13 and older, you know, you could give them an assessment. We'll share those links to assessments that I recommend. But even younger kids, if you think about it, you know if you have an extrovert or introverted child the minute you drop them off in the church nursery, right? Do they run in and start like playing with the other kids and, you know, love all the games that are there that they're playing, or do they just kind of go to the corner by themselves and do their own thing? You know? And that's okay.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay, that's so interesting, whether you're an extrovert or an introvert. That's the first part of the Meyers-Briggs. The second part is information processing, and that is sensing versus intuition. And this is basically how we take in information.
When we look at the sensing versus the intuition and how we take in information, really it becomes the largest area of conflict with individuals because it's so personal. And so, you know, we can measure extroversion and introversion pretty easily based on how people prefer to live their social lives. But it is hard to measure how people are taking information in. And so sensors at one extreme are very realistic people. They like facts. They like details. They're practical. They would say that they're down to earth. They love the word reality. They like to look to the past and experiences to guide their decisions. And on the other hand, intuitives, they prefer to focus on possibilities and the big picture, and they see patterns, and they like innovation and creativity to look forward towards the future. And so they love ideas, dreams, theory. They like to create. They like to imagine. And a lot of times you can see where the conflict would come in, right? Sensors, while they value their practicality, can get really annoyed with an intuitive's kind of creative, visionary, dreamy world. And intuitives can get really frustrated with the way that sensors might tie them down or shoot down their dreams for practicality and for reality,
good.
right?
That's good.
And so a lot of times we can think of, intuitives can think of sensors as, maybe boring or not creative, think of like an accountant, so to speak, right? And intuitives, sensors can get frustrated with intuitives' flightiness, or maybe it's not realistic, so you think of an intuitive as maybe an artist, working on a painting, or somebody that is, trying to create, has a dream, but doesn't really have a plan to get there.
That's good. Yeah, it makes me think of my husband and myself because
Yes.
He is like a total sensor, and then I'm more intuitive, and he's like, I'm not creative. I'm like, you are. You're just not tapping into it. But he is very logical, rational. He's like the best problem solver. Like, like he can get to the root. Like, the remote's not working, but it's something about the plug. Like, he will go 5 steps back. I've like kind of learned this from him. Like, oh, that's so interesting. I'm just like fixing the problem, but he can get to the root of the problem. Like,
and
he can say it's usually 5 steps back here, something's not working.
Yep.
And so, and I'm like, oh, okay. But I've learned from that. And you talked about, I think at the retreat, what was the exercise we did? We looked at a picture.
Yeah.
And you had people talk about the picture?
Yeah. This is one of my favorite exercises. I do it every time I lead workshops on this. I put a picture up, and, I change the picture every so often, so it's fun to see the different responses. But this time I put up a picture of Salvador Dali, and I can't think of the name of it right now, but it's like a picture, I think everybody's seen it, where there's like clocks that are folding, and it's got a desert background. And I divided the sensors and the intuitives into groups again, just like I had done with the extroverts and the introverts, and had them note what they saw. And the sensors when they look at this picture, they see the details, right? They see like the desert, and they see the clock says 5 o'clock, and they see that there's a walrus in the picture, and they, they see all the details. Whereas
what was visually evident, the tangible, yes, is what they talked about.
Yep.
Yes.
And what the intuitives see is a very abstract theory in the picture, right? And so I can't even think of some of the things
I want to say the intuitive were saying they were describing it more, like instead of like talking about the details, they were describing the feel, like hot, melting, dreary day.
Yes.
Whereas the other group were like, there's a walrus, there's a clock that's not working, or there's all these different details.
Yes. And so intuitives pull out the vibe, right? So sensors see the dots. If you picture dots on a paper, sensors see the dots. Intuitives see the connections between the dots, but we can miss the dots. I say we because I'm an intuitive. You're an intuitive.
Right.
But, my husband also is a strong sensor.
Okay.
And we early in our marriage would just get in this fight about our dishwasher because the dishwasher has a little red light on it, and when it's done, it stays red, and when the power's off, it goes away. And it was really important to him. It's still very important to him that the dishwasher light is turned off when the cycle has run, and we don't leave the dishwasher light on.
So you've got to turn it off manually.
Yes.
Okay. Because he notices that.
Yes. And he believes, I don't think he believes it anymore, but for a long time he believed that I saw that red light and that I just chose to leave it on.
Got it.
Where I'm telling you on the things that were in my brain, at that moment, the dishwasher light was not one of them. I just didn't see it because as intuitives, we miss the dots.
That's so funny. But then it's like I think of myself, and like I notice that I notice those things. Like I notice, and it might be the OCD in me, but like that's why like my house has to be tidy because I notice every little thing that's out of place.
Yeah.
So how do you describe that if you're an intuitive, but yet you notice these visual? But like I could not, like my sister, who's a designer, like it's so funny. She'll be like, "Don't you remember when we went to Grandma's house when we were little?" And she can remember people's houses. She can remember all these details, like where everything was. And I'm like, no, I don't remember any of that. I just remember feeling happy because we were eating spaghetti, like I remember kind of the invisible things.
That would be the intuitive, right? You're remembering the vibe. She's remembering the facts about the situation.
Right.
So, each of these 4 spectrums that we're talking about today, think about it again. If you're right-handed or left-handed, well, maybe you can write with both, right? You could be somewhere in the middle on the spectrum. So if you, finish this podcast and then you go and take the assessment, you're going to get a score. You're going to get a percentage, right? So your percentage could be 60% intuitive versus somebody that's 100% intuitive, right? I'm going to be more on the strong intuitive spectrum.
Got it.
But it doesn't mean that I can't see details.
Right.
It's just that my brain doesn't go there right away.
Yeah. And it's helpful to know because I've got some children who don't see details.
Yes.
And so I'm like, it drives me nuts. I'm like, do you not see, and maybe that's just a teenage thing. I don't know.
Well, but it also might not be. And that's to your point. If you're parenting and you've got a child that, let's say you're a sensor and they're an intuitive, they are going to, I think of like Linus from Peanuts that just kind of, was it Linus or Pigpen that walked around?
Pigpen.
Yeah, Pigpen that walks around with like a dust around him, right? And that's kind of what an intuitive child is like. They're creating, they're leaving crayons out, they're, the socks at the bottom of the stairs. You might think they're being disobedient, or you might think they're not, following your rules or what you ask them to do. But it very much could be that they just didn't see them.
Right.
And so with kids like that, you've got to create more systems for them.
I was about to say, you might just create a system.
Create more systems so they have more opportunities for success because it's not disobedience, it's not rebellion in their hearts. It's just that their brain is not seeing it.
Right. And so it might be talking about systems. Okay, we're having a laundry hamper in their room or in their bathroom, and put all your dirty clothes here, or your a thing for shoes, whatever it is.
Yeah. And having consequences. It doesn't mean they don't follow the rules, right? It doesn't mean that they can just leave things around the house if that's one of the rules. It's just having a little bit more grace with them and understanding that they're trying and they're just not seeing it.
That things are not jumping out at them like it does to us.
Yep.
That's good. Yeah, and you mentioned before when we were talking about, I was like, that has been so helpful when you told me that I'm intuitive. And I think you said that that's the minority of the population is intuitive, like only 25%, because a lot of times I go by gut instincts. And I thought everybody had that. We talked about that when we were having dinner that night after the first day of the retreat. But it's funny because I thought everybody, and I know everybody has gut instincts on some level, but a lot of the decisions that I make is just based on gut instincts. Yeah. But you're like, that's the intuitive in you.
That's the intuitive. We trust our gut and we just know. Again, we see the lines behind. If you think of a tapestry, sensors see the facts of the tapestry on the tapestry side. We see all the strings connecting it on the back. And so, again, you can see why there would be conflict in that. You can see why in a marriage there would be conflict. You can see in parenting why there'd be conflict.
Right.
And in fact, if you're an intuitive parent, if you have two intuitive parents and then you have a sensing child, they're going to need details. They're going to need facts. Kyla, our daughter, is a strong sensor and needed that structure. And so I learned really early on when she was little, giving her those facts and those details was really important, even though it was not innate to me, right? And then Luke came along, and Luke's much more like me. He's much more of an intuitive, and so those things didn't matter to him. So it is our job with our kids to adapt to how they're created so that we can set them up for success.
Yes. And I think even having these conversations, like explaining to them, like, I think that you're a sensor. I think that you're intuitive. It's so helpful, and they love it.
They love it.
That is one thing. I just read the Enneagram book. This was years ago, and I was going to the beach with my daughters, and one of them had two friends. I think they were 16 or 17 at the time. We talked for probably 3 hours on personalities and Enneagram, and they loved that conversation. So this is such a fun conversation. I think everybody likes to know them, understand themselves better, and how that impacts their relationship. So as you're listening to this, go have these conversations with your kids, because you're probably thinking, okay, this is my son or this is my daughter, and they probably would enjoy knowing that little tidbit of what you've noticed about them too.
Yeah.
Okay, so the third area of the Meyers-Briggs test is decision-making framework, and this is thinking versus feeling, and that is, how do we make decisions?
Yeah, and so really the difference between thinkers and feelers is simple. This is not a difficult one. Do we make decisions with our mind, with our logic, or do we make decisions with our heart, right? And so thinkers tend to make their decisions using logical analysis, and they objectively weigh pros and cons, and they value honesty and consistency and fairness. And so thinkers are much franker. They really want justice. They are not afraid to critique, and they can be really task-oriented. And feelers, on the other hand, if we go the other end of the spectrum, can be really sensitive and they're cooperative. But feelers, which you and I are both feelers, we tend to make our decisions based on our own personal values and how our decisions or our actions impact the people around us. And so, we're looking through a lens of, again, values, personal reflection, personal experiences. We try to be tactful. We're much more concerned with being tactful. We love and mercy and praise, and we're typically more people-oriented.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And then the thinkers are more task-oriented.
Definitely. And it doesn't mean that thinkers don't have feelings or that they can't be compassionate, right?
Right.
It's just that when they're making a decision, they can put those aside and they can look at something objectively.
Yes.
And as feelers, it's really hard to put our feelings aside and to not put that personal spin on it, or to look through the lens of our values.
Yeah, and I would say that my husband and my dad, they both are the thinkers, but you need those people in your life. Like, they are both, if I need a decision, or if I need somebody to help me process something, like, I can talk to either one of them and they can sum it up in one line. They're seeing that forest through the trees. And I'm like, you're right. Okay, thank you. I needed that. I needed that little nugget to help me sort through, because I'm a little foggy right now.
Yeah, we need that balance. And so as a strong feeler, someone who can definitely get caught up in how people will feel about my decisions. It's great to have my husband who's a strong thinker to be able to bounce things off of and say, this is what I'm seeing. What do you see? How do you see it from your perspective? And on the other hand, those thinkers out there, it's really wise for them to get a feeler's perspective on decisions because sometimes it's easy for them to be so detached that they are not realizing how they could be harming people.
Yes. And the tactfulness and all that is very important.
Yeah. And it makes me think, too, I think if you're dealing with daughters and they're in the middle school age, so to speak, when there's a lot of feelings running around.
Right.
I think of a group that I was working with one time. I went in and was doing some kind of team building with these families, and these girls, the majority of them were feelers, and then there were 2 girls that were thinkers, and there was such a misunderstanding. So these girls who were thinkers,
I can already see,
came across right,
blunt,
rude. There were names for them.
Yep.
And really, at the end of the day, they were just being logical,
right?
And they weren't getting into the drama, right? Thinkers don't get into the drama. They're like, "This is a waste of my time. Why would I do that?"
Right.
And these other girls were really camping out in the drama because their emotions were so tied into it.
Yeah.
And so we can misunderstand each other that way.
Yeah, and I've seen that dynamic happen so many times. And I think as a parent, it's important to teach our children both personalities, and I had one child that was more of the thinker that would say things flat out, and then, another one who was really sensitive. And I was always like, God gave y'all to each other, so the one that was really sensitive, she was so sensitive, like every little thing. And I'm thinking about like, the world is going to crush her, she's such a sensitive soul, which is good. But I'm like, she's got to have a thick skin, and so I'm like, this is good. She's got a sister that's helping build that, And so we would have lots of conversations about, got to let it roll off your shoulders. And sometimes you just got to understand, some people just don't have that filter, or they're working on it. And then the sister that didn't have the filter, she truly didn't understand. I'm like, I know this might not hurt your feelings, but there are a lot of people that saying it that way is going to hurt their feelings. Or I'd have to say, think it or say it.
Yeah.
Like that was our phrase. I heard that from a teacher. But, just because you think it doesn't mean you have to say it. And it's so important because so many people don't have a social filter now, and it hurts their relationships. And so, there are a lot of adults like, well, that's just the way I am. They value themselves on being honest, but I'm like, you can have a hard time with relationships if you don't have that tactfulness or that grace, the social graces, to know when to say something or when not to say something. And that's really something that we don't want to fail at as moms. Like we want to set our kids up to thrive in relationships. And part of it is knowing, whether we do need to help them understand the thinkers of the world, or if you have a child that can be very blunt, to help them understand like that it doesn't come naturally to them. And that's what I've learned. Some kids it comes naturally to them, social graces.
Yes.
And others it doesn't as much.
Yeah.
And like I said, God, you need both out there, but they both need to understand the other one better.
Well, and on that same note, if you are a strong feeler, or if your child is a strong feeler, just because we feel something doesn't make it true, right? And so we also want to coach those kids to know, okay, I might feel this way, but is it a feeling or is it a fact?
That's good.
And deciphering between the two, because a lot of times, especially in middle school, since that's what we're talking about, is we act on feelings, but they're not facts.
Yes,
and then we get ourselves in trouble.
Yes,
right?
And that feeling might be nobody likes me.
Yes.
Yes, I have no friends. Yes. And that's completely true. Yes, I love that. And so the fourth part of the Meyers-Briggs is structure and flexibility, and that is the difference between judging versus perceiving.
Yeah, and so on this fourth spectrum, we're looking at how do we prefer to live our lives? Do we want to live our lives structured, or do we want to live our lives fluid? And so judgers on one end of the spectrum, they like to live it structured. They tend to be organized and prepared, and they like to make lists and stick to plans. They don't like a lot of change. And they're comfortable following rules. Like they love rules because rules give them order. They like closure. They like to make decisions. They like to be scheduled, organized, have a plan. They like control. And one of their favorite words is now. And I just want to note that the word judger could be misconstrued as, judgmental, like a judgmental person. And that's not how they mean it. They're just saying they want to kind of execute and take control and judge the world that they're living in so that they can have structure. And then on the other end of the spectrum are the perceivers. And perceivers, they prefer to keep their options open. They like to be spontaneous. They like to smell the roses along the way. They like to be flexible with making plans. They're open. They like options. Very spontaneous, disorganized sometimes. They like to kind of live off the experience. They want experiences in life. They're very, very, very flexible. And their favorite word is later. They like to put things off. So can you see where the conflict could happen on this spectrum?
Definitely.
Whether it's with our children, whether it's with our spouse, family members. When somebody really likes a plan and somebody really wants to be last minute, there's going to be room for conflict.
Yeah, that's so good. I'm even thinking, I guess I'm thinking of Thanksgiving. Like, it's fascinating to me. I'm definitely a huge judger. Like, I like to plan. I like to structure. I probably think about the future too much, but I'm always, and it works. It's what allows me to juggle a lot of different things. But so Harry and I agreed to host Thanksgiving this year for his family. It was awesome, but it was going to be over 40 people.
Wow.
And so that's stressful for me. And I've never been a last minute person. Like, even in college, like I never stayed up all night studying for a test. I never crammed because the stress of that situation, I couldn't even do well. Like, I'm just a planner. I'm always most confident when there's a plan, and I have followed that plan. And so, for weeks, I was like, okay, we need napkins and plates. And I set up the table like the weekend in advance. Like, we need to see what we have so we can see what we still need. Like, that's what allowed me to enjoy that day. And so, but I laugh at myself because I compare myself to like one of his sisters and his mom. He has one sister that's like me and one sister that is like his mom, and they're the perceivers. And when they host Thanksgiving, and it is beautiful, it is what you expect, a great Greek cook to what their Thanksgiving to look like. But like back in the day when his mom would host Thanksgiving for probably 60 people, not thinking twice, she often would not start. She'd have maybe the table set maybe the day or two before, but she wouldn't start cooking until like maybe 7 o'clock the night before.
Oh, wow. I'm getting heart palpitations as a judger.
I know. It would stress me out. She would stay up all night long cooking. Like, wow. And you're like, there's no way this is going to happen. Like if you'd gone to, and seen the starting point, you're like, there's no way she can pull this off. But then you get there the next day and it's gorgeous and it's beautiful. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm like, I stressed myself out for 3 weeks versus they kind of condense their stress. It's just interesting.
It's just when it hits.
And so, they would always tease me, even with having a baby or raising kids, like how my process is so different and everything. I'm just such a planner. And I'm thinking so far ahead, and they're like, "Oh, what are you talking about?
What are you talking about? We've got this." Well, that's the thing is judgers start out with if they've got a project, right? Say it's Thanksgiving, say it's a book that you're writing, right? Mm-hmm. Judgers start out at a very high stress level.
Yes, that's exactly. Right? And then it goes down.
They plan, and then it goes down as they glide into the goal because they have set the table a week before.
Yeah. Even I was talking about like when I was in school, I learned that like my last week the week of exams, I would often go home to my house and watch movies. Like I was like, okay, I've studied, I'm ready. Now I can decompress. Yep. Isn't that funny? I never realized that.
Whereas perceivers, they're great. They're good. They start off with no stress because the deadline, Thanksgiving's a week away, right? Why would I stress now?
Right.
And so they start out with a low stress, and then at the last minute, their stress rises, which pushes them to cook all night.
Yes.
And then they deliver.
Yeah. And they say like, I need to have a fire under me to be motivated.
Yes. And another graphic I can't draw because we're not on video, but if you picture a chart with, time and energy, and then you picture an arrow starting in the bottom left corner going upward towards a goal, right? Like at a 45-degree angle in time and energy. A judger is going to go as straight as they can. That arrow is straight from the bottom left corner where, where it starts, the time and energy, up to the goal at a 45-degree angle at the top, as direct as they can. The perceiver is going to start in that same bottom, and they're just going to picture a line just like going around, doing loops, smelling the roses. Oh, look, squirrel, and they're just enjoying, but they're happy. They're enjoying experiences. They don't want the judger life, right? Like, why would I want it?
Right.
That sounds really boring and horrible and stifling, right?
Right.
And so but then they get there, they land in the same dot. It's just with lots of turns along the way. And so if you're a parent and you are a judger or you're a perceiver and your child is different, it's how do we adapt to that? So I definitely work as a judger, but at the core, I always test right in the middle. So I'm ambidextrous on both of on the spectrum. But our daughter, again, Kyla, is very, very, very structured. And so when she was in kindergarten, she was so happy. She was thriving. She loved being at school because it gave her structure. It stimulated her. There were clear expectations. And then summer would start, and she'd come unglued. She would be crying. She missed being at school.
Oh, interesting.
And so I thought, okay, what do I do? So, I went and got a big white poster board, just like they had in her classroom, and I wrote out a schedule for the day, just like she had in her kindergarten classroom. And I had it broken down by half-hour increments. And
that's like her security blanket.
I tell you, it completely shifted her countenance because she was like, okay, 8 to 8:30, I'm going to be eating breakfast. 8:30 to 9, get dressed, whatever it was. And I got so many weird looks from my friends, like, really, Kim?
Right.
Misunderstanding my intention behind it. But at the end of the day, that was me shape-shifting to her needs as a parent.
Yes.
And then the opposite, Luke, when Luke tests on the Meyers-Briggs, he's as far perceiver as you can get. He's like 100% perceiver, right? So I'm doing, because I do life, I do work, I did school the same way you did, where, if there's a test in 2 weeks, I'm going to study so I can be relaxed going into it.
That's exactly, yeah.
Well, I parented him that exact way as well. So you can see the conflict as a parent, where I'm pushing him as a perceiver to study, right? Do the thing, write your paper.
Right.
And he'd be like, Mom, I've got it. Those are like his famous words. I've got it.
He needs a t-shirt.
I've got it. Right. And so I was causing damage in our relationship as he got older, and I'm still writing him to live his life like a judger when he's really a perceiver. And guess what? He went to college. He's doing great. He's managing his life in a perceiver way.
Right.
And it's working for him. But I have to make sure it's not about me.
That's so good. I know, and I think about, I've got a child who's just like me, and she did summer school last summer, and they get their assignments, they get it all in one day, and I think they have a month to do it. She just crammed for 3 days, and she's like, she can't relax until it's done, and I'm thinking, that is me. It's so innate. Sometimes when you see your child, you're like, okay, nobody trained me to be this way. I am wired this way. When you see your child wired that way too.
Yeah, it is in your DNA. It's how God made you, and it's beautiful. Again, if we can live, when we allow our children to live in their creation, to live in the way that they were created, their strengths shine.
Right.
And even though they might not make sense to us, like Luke is now leading the organization that he's involved with at Auburn, and those strengths, the adaptability, they pull off all of these last-minute events, and he's the guy. He steps in and shines because he's super adaptable and flexible, and he's got ideas.
That's good.
And it works for them, and so you get to see the way that they're used.
That's so good. Well, now I even think about, Ella, I would say, is more of the perceiver. And, even with her cakes, she started making these amazing cakes during COVID. And I'm like, where did this come from? It just I was like, this is the craziest thing. I never knew she had this talent. But it came during her junior year, and it was just, junior year was so rigorous. She didn't know if she wanted to try to go to Reach school. And so she was taking AP and advanced classes. And so in that case, it was such a blessing when COVID just shut school down, because but it was interesting, and having that freedom and the space for her brain to just relax and open up and wonder, what do I want to do, and get creative. That's when she started doing these cakes. And so that is important to know if you've got a child that's a perceiver, like Luke or like Ella, to give them that space and to know that might be where their creativity gets to shine.
Yeah, and on that note as well, if you live a really overscheduled life and you are running your kids to all the sports practices and all of the events, and you've got perceiver kids, you are going to add undue stress and anxiety into their soul. And so it's really important that we pay attention to that, because Judgers can thrive in that. Perceivers don't as well.
Oh, interesting.
And so, like
yes.
you're saying, Ella finally had that space to create and to be and look at the strengths and the gifts that came out from that season.
Yes.
And just that empty white space for her to be.
Yeah, exactly. And even I think about doing some college tours, I think, we always tell people with Alabama and Auburn, like they are two different vibes. This is my perspective. I went to Alabama. I've got one at Auburn, another one going to Auburn, and I've done tours of both schools. And I'm like, Alabama, like you go on that tour and it is unbelievable, like off the charts. And to me, it's energizing. Yeah. Like we took Elle on this tour. We did this VIP tour. We're touring the Honors College and the Communications School and the Business School and all that. And I was like, I want to go back to school. Like this is unbelievable.
Yeah, let me do it again.
Yeah, everything was like first class. And I'm like, she's like, get me out of here. It's too much. It's stressful. It was so stressful for her. Just because, but the energy for me, it was energizing.
Yes.
And then I took Sophie on that tour, and she wasn't even planning to go to Alabama. And I was like making her do the tour. And then it energized her, and that totally changed her mind. Like that tour was the game changer. But it's just funny. But then I took Ella on the Auburn tour, and it was like just a slower pace. It's just how Auburn's vibe is. It's a slower pace. It wasn't as planned. I think they could step it up a little bit with their tour. Just this is my personal opinion. I liked the planned one, but she was like, I love it here. It was totally her vibe. And so, and then Sophie went and she was like, it just feels a little bit slower. It just wasn't as energizing to her.
Yeah.
And so nothing wrong. They're both awesome schools. And so it's like anything else in life. You got to know your child's personality and what kind of environment they might thrive best in.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, any closing points you wanna make or takeaways for moms or kids who are listening?
I think really just we need to stop and assess how God created us, because when we know our creation, the way that we're wired, then we can help support our kids in the way that they're wired. And so tapping into who we are and getting clear on that, and then tapping into who our kids are and what they need to thrive, to succeed, to be able to just live at peace and harmony in their little hearts. And so my favorite assessment, if you're interested in taking this online, if you can take the Meyers-Briggs, there is a fee. You would need to go through the organization. But there is a free version of it at 16personalities.com. That's the number 1 and 6, 16personalities.com. That's the one I like to use. And they give you great descriptions. They give you, a summary of your strengths and weaknesses in romantic relationships, friendships, parenthood, career paths, and so on. I also like Truity.com, Truity, Truity.com. The reason I like that is because they also offer other assessments. Like they offer the Enneagram, which, we didn't really touch on today from an assessment standpoint, but it's another powerful one, a different lens, looks more at our motivations than our preferences. And it has a version of the DISC and some other ones as well. And then, Elevate Moms is the group that I run, where we have coaches and we have counselors that help moms thrive so that families can thrive. And we have groups opening up in January for different topics, different ages and stages. But one of them is called Empowered Mom. And Empowered Mom takes a look at all of these assessments and helps us identify, again, our strengths through the way that we're wired, and also helps us engage and navigate our kids. And so that's just a resource at elevatemoms.com if that's something that's interesting to you.
That's perfect. And we will link all of those resources in the show notes.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you, Kim. This was such a needed conversation and also a fun conversation. I feel like we could just go on and on about all the 16 personalities, but I think this is going to be very helpful for moms and for families, both in the new year.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Friends, thank you for tuning in today. I am so grateful to have you here. And if you enjoyed this show, please subscribe wherever you listen and leave a ratings or review so that other people can find these messages too. For links to my books, my social media, and my new community on Substack, check out the show links. Thanks again for your support, and have a great day.